No one tool can solve every problem, but enterprise security vendors have a terrible habit of promising otherwise. Security teams don't need hype, you need answers and analytics you can act on quickly. ExtraHop uses network traffic analysis to complement your SOC stack with complete east-west visibility, real-time detection, and guided investigation so you can speed up threat detection and response by over 50%. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. By the end of 2020, 99% of exploited vulnerabilities will be publicly disclosed and known to IT system admins. The consequences of that fact means the burglar will already be in your house because you left the front door wide open by failing to patch known vulnerabilities. How can you keep the threat actors out? Through cloud-based automation, Automox enables you to slam the door on unpatched OS and third-party vulnerabilities across your entire Windows, Mac, and Linux infrastructure. Take advantage of a free trial with Automox to not only see the vulnerability status of your infrastructure, but do something about it within minutes. Start automating the fundamentals of cyber hygiene at securityweekly.com/Automox. That's securityweekly.com/Automox. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, and digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to breach or traverse the network. At Tufin, they've pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make network changes in minutes instead of days, reliably and securely. To learn more about Tufin, the security policy company, go to securityweekly.com/Tufin and sign up for a free evaluation. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. If you struggle with identifying and measuring enterprise risk and prioritizing vulnerabilities and threats within your organization, certainly we've never encountered anyone with that.
Never.
You want to go to securityweekly.com/webcast. We're doing a webcast with ServiceNow on that topic. We also have the Security Weekly 25 Index Survey. That's 25 publicly traded security companies, that's information security, that we're collecting information about through a survey. Go to securityweekly.com, click the survey link, tell us if you use them or if you don't, and you'll be invited to a private webcast to talk about the results. Everyone is still here from the previous segment. Beck, Mike, and Jeff are with me to talk about enterprise security news. I would say let's start with some of the funding rounds. Bitglass has raised $70 million in a Series D round. They're, of course, a CASB company. I don't know if there's anything else.
A what company?
CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker.
Ooh.
So if you got multiple clouds
Shiny.
and stuff.
I don't know how I've lived my life without knowing that acronym until right now.
Right.
That's amazing.
Which is actually, I don't know, people debate the CASB market all the time. Do we need it? Do we not? Obviously, people think we do, is they got more funding, so they must have some
I
customers.
can think of 70 million reasons why it's legit.
Exactly. Also in another deal, a $60 million deal, where a private equity firm has bought 70% stake in RedSeal, which is kind of an interesting company. They do like an attack simulation, but it's based on the configuration of all your devices. I don't know if you've seen RedSeal before. Yep. It's kind of interesting, that whole deal and how it played out. And an interesting approach in that space, basing it on the configuration of things. So it's pretty cool. I've seen a demo of it before. I like it. I think as a practitioner, I like to see more of the breach and attack simulation that happens in enterprise networks today rather than the configuration, but I could see a place.
When you say it's based on configuration, does that mean it's in theory tailored to the environment, tailored to the target?
Yeah, so they'll read your configuration from your network devices and other systems and then kind of theorize what attack paths might exist in your environment.
Kind of like what a pen test is supposed to do with whatever reconnaissance, which ends up being a vulnerability scan, is supposed to do.
I think, both.
Or kind of like Bloodhound.
Yeah, both of these areas are, breach and attack simulation and the RedSeal are supplements to penetration testing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know what that firm's going to do with them. It's a private equity firm. I'm sure they have a portfolio.
And now controlling interest in the company. So are they going to change direction, right? That's what I'm thinking too, right?
I'm thinking there's a change in logo in the future.
Yes, or a change in name sometimes too.
They'll rebrand it somehow.
Yep.
Or merge it with one of their other investments.
That'd be the interesting play, I think.
Are there statistics, generally speaking, about these first two stories about and I'm not sure what the right term is, the success ratio, the return on investment that all these funding rounds, we talk about the numbers that companies are receiving, but are there stats that are published anywhere on the success or failure rate of all these investments? Or do we just wait till next year's RSA to see who's not there?
Right. I'll defer to Matt on that. That's something he is would be focused on and looking into. Kind of similar to the Security Weekly 25, how well are the publicly traded companies doing, kind of thing. How much of a return on investment are people getting that do M&A or private equity? Yeah.
And I've had this type of discussion with Ron Gould, our friend, in the past, because he does investing now. Yeah. And I've always been curious as to why and how you measure the success of a company on the ability to get funding versus actually sell whatever they're selling and earn revenue.
One likes to think that if they're getting funding, they have sales and are solving problems for people and getting revenue in exchange.
One would like to think that.
One would like to think that. But I think
we've seen that the other way.
Yeah. I think in general tech in Silicon Valley, that's less true, right? Someone can have an idea and get funding.
Sure.
Maybe today, not as easily as years past, but I think it's more common in general technology. In security, I like to think it is a lot more closely tied to revenue, but again, that's a general observation.
Well, maybe that's Series D. Yeah.
That's a Series D for what was it? Not RedSeal, the other one that I mentioned, the CASB Bitglass.
Oh,
Bitglass.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
And D is just a fancy way of saying it's their fourth round of funding, right? Or maybe fifth.
Ish.
Yeah, because
they could have seed. Yeah. They could have various levels of seed funding, right?
Yep. Correct.
And in theory, all these funding rounds are providing the capital so they can do more development,
grow, expand, scale,
pay for the RSA booth and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep. Okay. Pay their RSA tax. Is that what?
I think that's what I said.
Google has announced 30 new features or enhancements. Is there a difference between a feature and I guess an enhancement is an update to an existing feature, and a feature is something new?
Yep.
It's a .1
Didn't we
release
have this discussion
versus
last
a
night?
new version release.
It's on our platform.
Yeah.
But your teaser for the Google, you said something about Google's expanding the cloud or something like that.
So it says improve the ability of organizations to manage security not only for the Google platform but other cloud-based services as well. I think this is largely the speculation that we had, where you have got security startups springing up, but if the major cloud providers were to have that functionality, would it kind of trump the smaller startups? In largely what we've seen is in the past when the large providers have done that, it's not a great feature. That even still the startups and other security companies are doing it.
So
way better.
my question is, with Google expanding their cloud offerings, is the sky the limit? That's my dad. That's my dad joke.
Nice.
Good dad joke
for the episode.
I picked up what you put.
I think they've got some catch up to play in the cloud market. Obviously, Amazon controlling much of the market share, and Azure really up and coming. In fact, I was playing around with Visual Studio, and like when you Google for how do I deploy my application inside of a container to the cloud and have that integrated with the IDE. Microsoft has some awesome articles about how to do it with Azure, and even have like prices in there. Like you get your first $200 worth of compute for free and all that stuff. So they're really trying to promote that to the developer community at least.
Well, I mean, just in general, their documentation and transparency is huge.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, actually, when I looked at it, I was like, maybe I will use. They got me. I'm like, I think I want to use Azure now. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
It's a nice
and
experience.
With Microsoft making VS Code, I'm like, it's probably going to work better than some of the other integrations. So, let's see, what else do we have? Lockpath has announced updates to its Keylight platform. This one was kind of interesting. I didn't know Lockpath. I might have heard of them before. I definitely didn't know their product Keylight. It says it brings visibility to risks frequently managed in disparate sources, internal data points, assessments, audits, authoritative sources, and external systems. There's a lot of players.
It's a lot of
I think
fluff.
So-
a lot of what you'll find back.
So my
In the announcements we cover, there is a lot of fluff. Yes.
Yeah, my question is simply,
Yeah.
What did all
What
that
does that mean?
What does that
Right.
mean?
That's
Yeah.
what I meant with the fluff. I just want to pet it. It's so cute.
Right? Like what problem are they solving is missing.
Yeah.
I think that should be
Yeah.
underscored in every one of these announcements, and it often is glossed over because I think a lot of, when they're writing these things and announcing things, they kind of understand the problem but aren't communicating it every time and don't know that all of us are like, well, what problem do you solve?
And in
Well-
honesty, that probably adds to the problem in security in general, and to what we were talking about earlier about your keynote and your conceptual idea of what is security.
Mhm.
If we keep talking jargon and throwing out the fluff, let's just pin it down. Let's be transparent.
Plus, these announcements are PR.
Yes.
So PR is an
Yeah.
adjunct of your marketing department. Your marketing department is going to want to get every value statement and value proposition and proof point of why you're better than whatever it is, doing everything you do.
Well,
And
and
I
they're,
think
they're
that's
putting
every
the terms
announcement.
in that are searchable so they
Yes.
can manage all
Right.
the analytics from all the marketing programs that they're
That's
doing.
Mhm.
fair, but if we complicate it to the point where we don't know what we're talking about, it
Right.
kind of shoots
Well,
itself in the
that
foot.
ship has sailed.
Value is one thing,
Yeah.
right? Understanding the problem is another thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Understanding, I also think, how it's deployed is missing. We've
Right.
talked about this
Right.
a lot. Like,
Mhm.
okay, is it in the cloud? Do I need an agent? How does it, and I think people
what the hell is
evaluating
that?
security at all levels of the technical spectrum really just get stuck on, well, how is it deployed,
Yeah.
right? And so in our briefings, that's one of the first questions. First, it's like, what problem do you solve?
Yeah.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about your solution. Okay, wait, hold on, stop. How is it deployed?
Right.
Okay, now continue telling me about the solution and the value. Now I can conceptualize it.
Solution,
Solution.
feature, application.
Solution, yeah, for lack of a better term, I agree. We can definitely debate solution
Yeah.
versus platform versus feature versus whatever
Yeah.
else you want to throw in there.
Yeah,
you know,
I-
my
I
belief,
agree.
there's no such thing as a solution.
Solution.
It's their tools.
Sure.
Well, shouldn't a solution solve a problem?
Yes.
You would think.
One would think.
Yep.
hmm But if you don't know what the problem is, it's hard to talk about a solution.
True.
Right.
That's deep, Paul.
Yeah, right? I guess in math you do work backwards,
It's the
but
solution to all your something.
something.
You get the answer, then you backtrack and show your work.
Right, exactly. Exactly. TrustBuilder Identity Hub was released for scalable access management for Docker. I'm not sure how GDPR compliance gets thrown in here. I guess it goes with
Analytics,
what we're
buzzwords.
talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is a problem, though, as we have more
Mhm.
things interconnected in the DevOps tool chain.
Yep.
How do you authenticate everything and attach identities to developers, containers, orchestration,
Right.
all of those things in CI/CD pipelines? I think it's one of the more major problems that we're facing today is the number of tools and how we allow them to prove their identity to do things.
Well, and that's an interesting example of where we were talking in our last segment about where PCI sort of conceptually has an answer for that,
Mhm.
but is certainly not technology specific. But PCI requires every user developer to have a unique ID. Now,
Sure.
how many environments do you see where developers are just they set up whatever, and they set up an account to use to do whatever they're doing, and it's admin or it's
Mhm.
dev
Right.
1, 2, 3, and everybody uses it no matter who it is.
Or the danger is the application uses it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And that's where we get into trouble
Mhm.
Right.
sometimes.
So the answer is there, the solution is there, follow PCI, but you have to have somebody that connects the dots. Oh no, what you're doing here, this applies to that, and this is how you need to do it the right way in order to meet this particular PCI requirement
Right.
that you might miss because it doesn't explicitly say in this particular environment do this.
Start
Yeah.
with the end in mind.
Yeah.
If you don't know exactly what the end is, that's where the problem. That's kind of how those problems develop. I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting as we've talked about PCI. It's probably not going to say you need a vault, right? Because then there's a specific set of vendors
Mhm.
that provide a
do
credential
that.
vault, right?
Right.
But what you need is a way to validate the identity and authenticate various
Yep.
components of your application, which, by the way, you run into that problem very, very quickly when you're developing an application.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, we really need a vault because I don't want the password hanging around in config files.
Yep.
Like ours in my applications today, because I
Mhm.
haven't yet implemented a vault.
Right.
but-
I was going to tell a story, but we're on the air, so I'm not.
Yeah.
Remind me to tell you a story when we're finished.
You said very, very quickly. It's the whole development world, right?
Mhm.
You have to develop quickly. You have to have a timeline in place. So when you're developing quickly, you don't necessarily have security in mind. So it goes back to, chicken egg.
Mhm.
The end in sight. What
Yeah.
is the end? How do we get there quickly? But let's rein it in and let's do it right.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's the
the
hard thing to
the
do.
worst offenders for following security rules in most enterprises are the admins, and the second worst are the devs.
Mm.
And
in
the
my
mo-
opinion.
I would say the more senior, and what John Strand has told me in his experience, it's the more senior
Yep.
folks that are doing it the worst, because they're like, oh, I've doing this a long time.
Right.
It'll be
Yeah.
fine. I know what I'm doing, right?
Yep. Yep.
And
Yeah.
developers, I think, especially the newer developers, want to be compliant with the guidelines and the standards, and make sure they're doing things securely in the right way. Whereas the more senior developers are like, I've been doing this 20 years.
Mhm.
I don't have to follow that guideline or standard. And oftentimes they're the ones introducing more vulnerabilities.
And that's when we come back to something that hasn't been patched or updated for 10 years. Oh,
Right.
and that's why we go back to pen testers using things from way long ago, and it still works.
Mhm.
Yep.
So
Yep.
There really wasn't much else all that interesting in the news this week, to be quite honest with you. There is an announcement from Sysdig. We did an interview with them on Application Security Weekly this week. They've united cloud native visibility and security in a platform update. This again is addressing the problem we have with containers, container security, and
Right.
DevSecOps, for lack of a better term.
that's
Maybe
what's
we can take a moment to ask Coalfire if there was anything that they wanted to bring up that maybe they didn't mention in the last segment.
going. Oh
It's a
my.
good segue, Jeff. I like it.
There's so much. Because I'll be honest, one of the favorite things I like to talk about is, Coalfire and, what we've been doing there. I can go on and on and on about that thing. I think we spoke a little bit about our R&D team.
Mm-hmm.
I gave a shameless plug to the R&D team in the last segment. But we actually just released a new, basically another new experimental tool set. We're working on we're looking at hardware attacks or attacks against a platform that supports virtualization, just for fun and learning experience. And we were working within the Intel AMT feature set,
Mhm.
and being able to leverage that for malicious purposes. And we just launched that day before yesterday.
Mhm.
Time's strange. I'm traveling. We have a flight that's got
Sure.
canceled. I'm completely
Oh,
confused
no.
where I'm at, where I'm going. But yeah, I believe that was the day before yesterday. We launched the Intel AMT stuff that one of the members of our R&D team, Victor, put together. It's
And virtualization security is still, I think some may look at it and say, well, that's old. We have containers, we have serverless now. But it's not the be-all, end-all for everyone. I think sometimes what we lose sight of, talking about the news and all the latest technology, is there's a place for a lot of this technology we may consider old, right? But
Right.
virtualization is still very applicable.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
In fact, some of the newer designs we're discussing is very much has to be virtualization based, because it's only supported on Windows, and it's really hard to create a Windows container. There are, Azure
Right.
features that do that, but when it has to be here, for example, and not in the cloud, virtualization is the play.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's still around. It's in virtually every enterprise we end up in that we're
Right.
doing testing work for. So
And I think it's the same thing too. We talked on a show earlier this week about the app user data and how the network is just a transport. But you still have people that work in an office. You still have an internet connection. You still have firewalls and other things. So there is still that traditional infrastructure. I think your technology is going to be a lot more spread out.
sure.
But there's still going to be these things we consider traditional or older network security technologies.
Right.
It's still going to exist.
It's minimized,
It's
um,
minimized.
Mm.
which is good and bad.
Mm.
Because when it's minimized with an organization, it's a smaller investment. Smaller investment gets less attention from
Right.
a perspective from a initiative side,
Mm-hmm.
from security efforts.
I was going to say in the last segment when you were asking about the future of PCI, I
Mm.
was going to bring up virtualization and say, PCI struggled for 5, 6, 7, 8 years with coming up with a position or a stance on things like virtualization. Like there's a perhaps archaic requirement in PCI that says you have one function per server.
Yep.
And so when virtualization started, people started saying, well, QSAs would say, well, you've got a virtualization server that's running multiple things. Doesn't that violate the PCI requirement? And it took them years to sort of educate people to know it's different. And you can have virtual environments running on the same virtual server, and you're still satisfying the requirement. But here's what you need to do to make sure that you're really okay. So it took them how long to do virtualization, and now we're talking about Dockers and containers.
Yeah,
in
but
the
what's
cloud.
interesting, it's actually applicable to Dockers and containers.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's absolutely. But it doesn't.
The older standard applies to the newer technology.
It's all been done
Perhaps
before.
more easily than the intermittent virtualization.
Yes.
It's a little bit more straightforward. That's why I was asking. I forget whether it was on or off the air. Whether an API can be used
was on the air.
for firewall rules to create
Right.
to create a segmented environment that's isolated, therefore putting things
It was
on the outside out
I
of scope.
rejected your question because it's uncomfortable.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. It is an uncomfortable. It is an
question to
uncomfortable
answer, yeah.
question, but it's a question that's being asked.
It's legit. I didn't question
Yeah.
the legitimacy.
So
Don't like it.
stay tuned. 5, 6, 7 years from now, PCI will have an answer for it.
Right. Well, it's almost how long it took to address mobile.
Yep.
That was also a long,
What?
burdensome
Mobile's been
issue.
addressed?
Well, then there's that.
I kind of got that too. Oh my God, you're
Yeah,
influencing me
well,
the
that's
wrong
interesting.
way, Jeff.
How does the mobile payment services interact with PCI, like Google Pay and things like that?
Jeez,
Yeah.
How much time do we have left?
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a ask a QSA kind of question, or
Different.
a recovering
Right.
QSA. Or
Well, I'll give you the classic example, which is Square, which you say you use. And it's a pragmatic, reasonable solution, but Square has assumed the liability for all the merchant
Merchants.
customers that,
Right.
that use Square. They say, use our device. If you have a problem, we got you covered. So they are acting in the role, they're technically a service provider. They're in some way a payment solution provider, but they're acting as what's called a payment processor or a payment gateway, effectively the acquiring bank, the bank of the merchant. That where in the regular PCI world, and there's a breach, the card brands go to the payment processor or the acquiring bank, and they give them all the love and the fines, and it's up to the bank to extend that love to the merchant. Square has circumvented all that and said, don't worry about PCI compliance, just use Square, we got you covered. That's how they deal with it.
Right.
To some degree, that's how the others do it as well.
Google Pay and Apple Pay, and now
Yeah.
Apple has its own
Yeah.
credit card or something now,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we could go on for hours. But Square's a good example. That's the way they handle it. They handle it by just assuming the liability and
Right. With
being
Square,
safe.
though,
that's
I
a
mean,
great idea, though. I mean, it's all about from a business decision perspective,
Mhm.
risk transference. Absolutely.
yeah.
You
And
know,
if
Right.
you're aware of the revenue stream that Square has, they can afford to take
Right.
on the liability.
True.
In Square's example, though, the customer has a card,
Yep.
right? In
Yep.
the Google Pay or Apple Pay example, customer has a phone.
right.
And we were talking Monday, actually, Mike Murray from Lookout was talking
Mhm.
about, well, how do you trust what's on your phone? and that was some of my briefings with various companies that do anything with mobile is if it's a two-factor or you're running an app on there, how do you trust anything that's on a phone if there's malware on the
Mhm.
phone? It can do whatever it
So
wants.
this
on the
is
phone.
one of
My
the
physical credit card is different.
this is one of the lesser known dirty little secrets of PCI. And it's weird, but the whole PCI industry is designed because there's data breaches. And why do you steal a credit card? Because you want to use it or sell it to somebody that's going to use it to commit fraud.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the end game. But PCI in writing doesn't talk about fraud at all.
Oh,
It's
no.
all about
skirts
the
it.
theft of the card data
Right.
It implies it.
that will ultimately be used to
For
commit
fraud.
fraud.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So in the case of the Google Pays and the Apple Pays, which came out first? I want to say it was Apple Pay.
Yeah.
When Apple Pay first came out, it was only a matter of weeks or months before somebody figured out a bug not with the application itself, but the way it was implemented. Have we heard this one before? And they were able to commit fraud, because what those solutions do is you register your card somewhere, and then they use a token.
Yep.
And now many businesses have that.
Yep.
Starbucks and CVS
And a token is not a credit card, therefore the rules don't apply.
Right.
And
from a consumer perspective, it's frustrating.
I don't agree with that statement, but that is the prevailing.
Because like I can configure Google Pay, but then if I go to Starbucks, like they have their payment system and their app, and CVS, all these companies have their own app with their own. So I got to put my credit card now in all these different apps on my phone, and the attackers are just going to go after whichever one is the most vulnerable.
Well, and the attackers ultimately want to commit fraud.
Right.
So if they can exploit Apple Pay and Google Pay and commit fraud, that's bad, but that's not the arena that PCI plays in. So let me blow your mind a minute. We're familiar in the PCI world of tokens replacing cardholder data. Therefore, we don't have to do PCI because everything revolves around, is there a primary account number, which is the technical name for the 16 digits that are on your credit card. The 16 digits on your credit card are in and of themselves a token. They represent your bank account. So even the credit card number, in actuality, is a token by definition.
And would a second factor token be the CVV number?
You're such a nerd. You're such a nerd. Geek.
I am a geek.
Love it. Yeah. No, that's awesome.
But I think we're of a mind that because tokens can be used to commit fraud, tokens are something you should still worry about and protect and secure. And there's conveniently this standard that spells out how you should protect your data. So substitute cardholder data or PAN with token, follow the same rules. That's what I would prefer to have happen.
That's what I wanted you to say the first time.
I got there.
Oh yeah. There's a God bless America moment in the whole thing, right? Which is, in order to be able to, to be secure, one of the responsible security program, and these things all tie together. Like protect those things that are still reasonably sensitive, time sensitive, reusable,
right?
At a level they need to be protected. Something consummate with the risk of your business. I hate to sound a little cheesy and like a stuffed shirt on that, but it's true. I mean, all these philosophical things. It comes back to the original, the concepts behind, running a secure environment.
Right.
We had a talk last night about the risk equation and misusing the terms risk and threat and vulnerability at length, just because it's become very commonplace to use these terms.
Right.
And
they're not synonymous.
Right. And it demonstrates that
it's a whole other segment too.
Yeah. It totally demonstrates there's a lack of fundamental understanding within the industry as a whole.
Yep.
I will step down off of my and your soapbox.
Well, and it's going back to some of our news segments and what gets written up by the PR firms and what makes it to the press and the announcements. They throw these words out because it's people that have been given the here's what you need to put into the message, and here's all the words.
It's too fluffy.
And they put it together in a sentence that they think makes sense.
Right.
Where we read it and what do you say?
I like Beck's comment. It's so fluffy.
It is fluffy.
You want to pet it. That's great. Well, Jeff, Beck, and Mike, thank you very much for appearing on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thanks very much.
That will round out the show. We've got one more segment after this, which is Matt Alderman and myself talking about everything we saw at Secure World and all of the different vendors and their solutions. Air quotes.
Sweet.
Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time.
Thanks.